Hello everyone, I'm a tutor from UPlads and today we are going to learn a little bit more about automation in SQL, MySQL. I'll also tell you the purpose of doing so, but before that, till now we have covered almost all the functions, numeric, date, string. So we can deal with whatever comes our way. We also had a very in-depth look at the joins. In which scenarios do we need to use such joins? I've also demonstrated the same to you. Now moving on to next is what in those cases where you have to execute that same code again and again. Like let's say it is a daily job. I want to run that job every day. In that case, what will happen is I will have to manually go and write that code every day and execute it myself every day, which is a very tedious task for me. Why would I want to do that? So instead of that, what I will do is I will instead make a procedure, and I will schedule that procedure for every day, and I'll just call that procedure. That's it. So whenever my calling of a procedure is scheduled, I don't have to go back to MySQL, write n lines of code and execute and get my result every day. That is very operational work. To avoid this operational work, we have something called as automation, and that we can do in terms of a procedure. Okay. So now you must be seeing that after so many lectures, there is a different screen you are able to see, right? So this is basically MySQL Workbench. Okay. This is very similar to MySQL terminal. Now, whosoever is comfortable working on Workbench can do so. They have to make the proper connections. That's it. So there are various tables available. So as you can see, Sakila was a table that was preloaded or pre-available for us. So that you can see. We have our UPLATS table also. So you must see that in table, under tables, we created so many tables. Okay. There are a few backup which I created for my own purpose, but there are so many tables that we created. Okay. As of now, we have not created any stored procedure or functions, right? So as you can see, there are different forms of storage available in UPLATS schema. That is in the form of tables you can store, in the form of views you can store your data, in the form of stored procedures, in the form of functions. Okay, now stored procedures and functions are very similar. Okay, once I teach you stored procedure, you will definitely understand how do you make use of functions. Okay, so that was about our UPLADS database. Now, this is the query window. So as you must have seen in the terminal, there was a black screen where we used to write our code and just press enter to see the output of our code, right, of our query. But in this case, we have to write our query. We have to write our query in this query window. Okay. As you can see, there is a limit set to this particular query to 1,000 rows. You can also select don't limit if you just want, if you know that your query is or your data is small enough. But if it is big data, it has been come with default settings of limit to 1,000 rows. Okay. Then there is a debug mode available. You can just toggle and between as you can see the use of this icon or this particular button is that you can toggle whether execution of SQL script should continue after failed statements or not. Okay, let's say you have written 5 lines of code, all independent of each other. And if it fails at the third statement, you want to continue after third statement, you can do so. Okay, so MySQL Workbench is basically very similar to what we worked on terminal. Okay, the code is also the same. Even the code does not change. But the only difference between both of them is this is very easy to use rather than writing tons of lines in MySQL. Okay, that becomes very difficult to maintain there. So instead of that, what we do is we write down all of the code here and then execute it all at once. Okay, this we cannot do in terminal. In terminal, if you write 1 line of code and if you press enter, you will be executing that code, right? You will be executing that statement, which we don't want to do in our case. Okay, so I've written a simple query that I write every time at the start of my lecture. Select start from uplads.courses, which shows me the welcome message, SQL training, presentation by uplads, the contact details are available. So basically I had 5 rows in my table. Okay, so this is a very simple query. Let me rerun it for you guys. If I do control enter, you can see that my data was run and 5 rows were returned to me in a very short duration. It did not even take a second. Okay, so it was that fast. You do not get all these information available when you are running your query over MySQL terminal, right? So this is what is the advantage of using particular MySQL Workbench. Also, this Workbench is for MySQL. Similar Workbench you will have for different platforms. For MySQL software, for SQL software, server software that is provided by Microsoft, for them you will see a different kind of Workbench they have created for them. It is actually, I have also worked on PostgreSQL. So for that, you will see a different platform. Okay. But the only advantage of such platforms is that the Workbench is very much easily accessible rather than terminals. Okay. So it is up to your choice which you want to go ahead. You can see that you can create a new SQL tab for executing queries. Then here you have the open option, that whichever script file you have already written, you can open that. Then there is this inspector for the selector object. Let's say you have got some query, you have got some error, you want to debug it, you can use this. Then we have a create new schema. So here it is like drag and drop. I don't have to write anything. Okay. If I do something like this here, I can just write a new schema name here and I can create it. I can just apply, I'll get a new schema created. Just as I created uploads, I'll get a new schema. Okay. So it is very simple to use, very easy to use. If I want to connect to some other database, I can connect to that database. Unfortunately, right now I have only one database created, so I cannot switch it and show it to you. Then we have this query execution options. Okay, we have this auto commit also. If you uncheck auto commit transactions, I have told you what commit does. It is like it commits the system until that point. So if your auto commit is off, if you get some error in between the execution of few queries, your commit will not happen at all. Your initial queries will also revert back to its original state. It will not execute. Okay. Then we have few edit and file options. These are very common to what you use in Microsoft Word and Excel. Then we have this server. We can check the server status. We have logs here. We can import data. We can export data from, let's say I want to export Sakila database into Excel. I can do that using data export option. Okay, so there are many things you can do here. Also, let's say you want to write a shell script, you can do that, and you can connect it to MySQL. Okay, this would be helpful to you when you are scheduling a job. Let's say you have created a procedure, you want to schedule it, you can write a shell script for scheduling. So this was all about my SQL Workbench. So whenever I do a control enter here, I get the output. As you can see, it was the second time I executed my data. Okay. Now moving on to next. We talked about automation. Okay. Now, when do we use automation? Let's say you have that same piece of code, which you have to reuse it again and again, over and over, right? It is a very tedious work, or it is very operational to write that code again and again to, get your results. The best way to do that is automate. And how do we automate is you create a stored procedure, you write a SQL code in that procedure, you can save it, and then whenever you want to use that particular code or a line of code, you can execute the procedure. Okay, you don't have to remember that what lines of code you have to rewrite and get the expected output. Okay, so basically the stored procedure is a prepared SQL code that you can save, so the code can be reused over and over again. Okay, let's say there are n lines of code. Instead of writing those n lines, you can prepare a procedure and call just one procedure or execute just one procedure in that case. Okay. Now, if you have an SQL query that you write over and over again, you save it as a stored procedure and then just call it to execute it. Isn't that doesn't that sound very simple to use, right? So you can also, there are variations available with procedures. You can pass parameters to a stored procedure so that the stored procedure can act based on the parameter values that is passed, or you can just not pass anything at all and write some default statements. I will demonstrate both the scenarios to you. So I have this piece of code I have written for you guys. Let's say I want to create a procedure. I want to create a procedure with the name you proc underscore demo under uplad's schema, and I just have one line of code in it, that is select star from uplads.users. Okay, I don't want to write this. This is not a very ideal example, as I'm writing just one line of code in it, but this is just to show you that how do we create procedures without parameters. Okay, so when I go ahead and execute this, you can see here that my procedure got created, okay, within no time. So what it did was, it has this piece of code right now. This query is not executed because we have just created the procedure. To execute the query, let me write a new script file, okay. Let's say I want to execute this. Okay, so what I will do is I will call that procedure. Its name is uplatch dot proc track underscore demo. Okay, and simply write on this. Okay, so since this is a non-parameterized procedure I have created, I need not pass anything to that procedure. Okay, so if I simply go and do this, you can see that whatever data was present in uplatch.users got printed here. This is when the query gets executed. Okay, so I simply had to call this one line here. Okay, now suppose that there were multiple lines within this particular procedure. Let's say there were 5 lines. So had it been a normal terminal where I have to write each line, every day I have to write those 5 lines and get my output. But if I have created a procedure, I can simply execute one line and I can get all my output in one place, right? So this was creating procedures without parameters. Now let's say we have to create the procedures with parameters. Okay, how do we do that? Let me demonstrate that to you. Okay, I'll tell you that what exactly I'm writing. It's a create procedure. Let's say with the name uplatch dot, since it is a parameter, so param proc demo. Okay, now let's keep that as our name. Now let's say you are accepting some input here. You're expecting some input here. Ref, let's say ref ID integer. Okay, so what I have done is, this is the input that you are expecting. Okay, while calling the procedure, you are passing that input value is nothing but ref underscore ID. Okay, now what you will do here is, we will first begin our line of code. Yeah, okay, sorry, begin, and then we'll have to write select star from, let's say I want to retrieve one particular ID or one particular ID from uplatch.users. Okay, so my query will remain the same as I used in previous one, but my where condition will have one more addition. Okay, in my previous SQL procedure, what I was doing was I was selecting all the rows from uplatch.users, but my task is to retrieve only specific ID row for that specific ID. So I have to pass a parameter here, and that same parameter I've used for identification. Okay, so this is my query. I will end my query line here. If there are more queries, I can write here in between. If there are none, I can just end it with an end clause. Okay, now after end, I have to close it with the delimiter, and then delimiter. Okay, so this is how our procedure has been created with the help of the parameter. Okay, so let me go ahead and execute this. You can see that my uplatch.param proc demo has been executed. Okay, now let's say I want to call this procedure. How do I do that? Let me demonstrate it to you here itself. So just param proc demo. Now here I have to pass pass a value. Okay, if I don't pass, we'll demonstrate that what happens. Let's say if I call this. Okay, incorrect number of arguments. That means we have created a procedure with some input parameter and we have not passed anything, which is not in alignment. That is why it is throwing an error. So we have to pass something here. Let's say I pass 5. Okay. If I enter, I get this particular row. Okay. Now also let us try to get the answer by manually writing. Okay. If I write something like this and I execute, okay, I have to demonstrate it in a different tab maybe. Yeah. So when I execute this, you get 5 SQL 30 and null. And here also for procedure, if you can see, you got 5 SQL 30 and null. Okay, that means our job is correctly executed. So this is how you write when you want to write a parameterized procedure. We have also demonstrated both the scenarios. Okay, so this was all about procedures. Moving on to next is our view. So what is a view? In SQL, a view is a virtual table based on the result set of an SQL statement. Okay, so there is one SQL statement, you get some output. That output itself is a view. But what happens in a terminal is that I cannot save that output anywhere. To save the output of a query, I have something called as view in MySQL. Not in MySQL, but overall in SQL. Okay. Yeah, so let me demonstrate it to you. Also, you will not see any difference. Now, why it is called as a virtual table is because you will not see any difference between a table and a view when displayed together, because a view also contains rows and columns just like a real table. The fields in a view are fields from one or more real tables in the database. Okay. You can also add SQL functions, where and join statements to a view and present the data as if the data were coming from one single table. Okay, let me demonstrate that thing to you. Okay, now let's say, let me create a brand new one. Create view that's the name given as select star from, let's say, users. Okay, so this is how we create a view. Create view, give the name of the view, define it as the query. Okay, this can be anything, whatever query. There could be a join of two query as well. So you may go ahead and explore that part. When I execute this, you can see that my view got created. Okay, now let us see what is present in that view. Okay, so if I do select star from that view, let us see what output do we get. Do you see? We have got all the rows again which were present in uplads.users. So our view has definitely worked. Now, as I told you that I can also select a specific column. Let's say ID equal to 5, I'm selecting. Okay, so I got the result for ID equal to 5. Also, if I do any changes to uplads.users, same changes will be reflected in our view as well. Okay, you need not go and re-execute the view. Whatever changes you make in the table used for creating the view, the changes will also be reflected in my final view. Okay, so that is one advantage, that even if you have changed your table or the data in your table, it will still be reflected in your view once created. Okay, so that was about views. Let me just reiterate you the formal definition, that in SQL, a view is a virtual table based on the result set of an SQL statement. A view contains rows and columns just like a real table. The fields in a view are fields from one or more tables in the database. That means you can perform join on it, and you can retrieve data from multiple tables. But when you do select star from that view, it feels like you are selecting it from one particular table. Okay, So that is how you can understand the difference between procedures and views. That's how you can understand the difference between the views and the tables and the real table. Okay, so that was it. As per our ritual, we will do that today on our MySQL workbench. Okay, when I execute this, I get it. Thank you from you, Plats. If you have learned like if you are comfortable with MySQL workbench, please go ahead and use that. If you're comfortable with the terminals, please go ahead and use that. But before that, I would suggest to look at the advantages and disadvantages, which I've already mentioned in our previous lectures. That what are the advantages of using terminal, what are the advantages of MySQL workbench. You may go ahead and explore more over it and start with some basic SQL queries. Once you are thorough with your basic SQL, you may definitely jump deep dive. You can deep dive into the advanced SQL program, wherein you will learn more about dealing with big data, right? So this is basic SQL is like an initial step towards data domain. So it has to be very thorough. The concepts have to be very clear when you're using it, why you're using it, right? So thank you from you, Plats.